My name is Evelyn Carter, and I was 68 years old when I realized silence could be the sharpest weapon a woman like me possessed. The moment that taught me this didn't happen in a courtroom or a bank or any grand boardroom. It happened at my own kitchen table, on a quiet afternoon a week after my only son's wedding. Vanessa, my brand new daughter-in-law, walked into my house without so much as a phone call. She still had the glow of a honeymoon about her, hair brushed sleek, perfume that carried just a little too far in the narrow hallway. She smiled at me like a woman playing a role, sat down across from me, and laid a stack of papers on the table between us. Her nails tapped the cover sheet twice, sharp little clicks that echoed in my ears. "Evelyn," she said sweetly, "it would be best for the family if we consolidated assets right away. You know, merge accounts, simplify things. Michael and I believe in transparency. You're..." Her words rolled off her tongue smoothly, like she had rehearsed them in front of a mirror. But what she didn't know, what no one except me and my lawyer knew, was that hidden beneath ordinary accounts and modest savings, I guarded a legacy worth $35 million. My late husband, Richard, and I had built it together brick by brick, deed by deed, while raising our son in this very house. We had promised each other that the fortune would only ever serve as a foundation for Michael when he was truly ready to build his own life. And now, barely 7 days into his marriage, this young woman thought she could simply walk in and pry open that vault with a smile and a few legal terms. I remember pressing my fingertips against the edge of the contract. The paper was smooth, almost slick, like it had been handled many times already. I could hear the refrigerator hum, the faint chirp of birds in the yard, even the clock ticking above the sink. Everything around me felt suddenly louder, as if the house itself was warning me. I lifted my eyes to hers and let the silence stretch. I didn't scold. I didn't argue. I simply closed the folder and pushed it back toward her. Her smile faltered. "Don't you want to look it over?" she asked. I shook my head slowly. "Not today." Inside my chest, my heart was pounding, not from fear, but from recognition. This wasn't about family harmony or simplifying finances. This was about control, about testing boundaries. She was probing for weaknesses. In that instant, I knew two things with absolute clarity. First, my silence had unsettled her more than any protest could have. Second, the game had only just begun. What she didn't realize was that I had spent decades preparing for people exactly like her. When Vanessa left my kitchen that day, her perfume still hanging in the air like smoke after a candle has been snuffed, I sat alone at the table and let the weight of memory press down on me. The house felt smaller without Richard. It had been almost 10 years since I buried him, but his presence lived in every beam, every blueprint folded in the drawers of his old desk, every garden bed he had turned with his own hands. Richard wasn't born into money. Neither was I. He was the son of a coal miner in West Virginia, and I was the daughter of a school teacher who taught me that every dollar ought to have a purpose before it left your hands. When we married, we didn't have much more than determination. I still remember the first duplex we bought on the edge of Richmond. The paint peeled, the pipes rattled, and the mortgage terrified us. But Richard had a way of seeing potential where others only saw decay. "Every house has bones," he told me once as we hammered new siding in the winter cold. "If the bones are strong, the rest can be rebuilt." That belief became our compass. Over decades, we moved from one property to another, buying, repairing, holding, renting. I learned to read contracts as carefully as I read cookbooks. Richard taught Michael how to swing a hammer and measure twice before cutting once. Slowly. What started as survival turned into a fortune. But Richard and I always agreed. The money itself was never the point. It was the security, the discipline, the foundation for Michael's future. Before he died, Richard sat me down on the porch one twilight evening, the cicadas buzzing like electricity around us. He held my hand, his skin worn rough from years of work, and said, "Evelyn, don't give him everything at once. Promise me that. Make sure he builds before he inherits. If not, the weight of it will crush him." I promised, and I've kept that promise. The estate was placed in trusts, layered so carefully that even the sharpest lawyer couldn't untangle them without my consent. On the surface, it looked like I had little more than a pension, a modest savings account, and the house. That was by design. Still, as I stared at the papers Vanessa had left behind, I thought about the delicate line between protecting and controlling. Michael was 32 now, old enough to make his own choices, yet still trusting enough to believe the best in people. I had raised him to be kind, not cunning, and in that very kindness lay his vulnerability. I ran my fingers along the wooden table, tracing grooves carved by years of family dinners. This home, these walls, they had held us through loss and triumph. They reminded me that the fortune wasn't built overnight and couldn't be handed over lightly. Vanessa might think I was just an old widow clinging to her son's life. She had no idea she was up against a lifetime of discipline, a fortress built on trust and silence. Over the next few weeks, I watched Vanessa carefully. I didn't spy on her. I've never been that kind of woman. But I listened. I observed. And sometimes the smallest cracks appear when people think no one is looking. She came by often, sometimes with Michael, sometimes on her own, always cheerful, always eager to help. She brought pastries from a bakery downtown, fussed over the garden, complimented the curtains as if she were already settling into the role of mistress of the house. Michael, sweet boy that he is, seemed flattered by her enthusiasm. He would grin at me like a schoolboy, happy that his wife was making an effort. But beneath her polished manners, I noticed the faintest impatience, the quick glance at the clock, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes. One afternoon, while Michael was out in the garage sorting tools, Vanessa leaned against the kitchen counter and asked, "So, Evelyn, do you keep all your accounts at one bank, or do you spread things around? I heard diversification is important." Her tone was light, conversational, but I caught the flicker of calculation in her gaze. I answered simply, "I keep enough where I need it. That's all you should worry about." She laughed, but I could feel the chill under her charm. Later that night, I sat in my room, thinking about Richard's old warning. Make sure he builds before he inherits. My son was building, yes, but not fast enough to outpace the kind of ambition Vanessa carried. She wasn't reckless, no. She was deliberate, testing boundaries like someone pressing a fence to see where it might bend. I didn't sleep well. Every creak of the house reminded me that my silence could not just be passive. It had to be active, strategic. If I confronted her too soon, she would twist it into paranoia. If I told Michael outright, I risked driving a wedge between us, making me seem like a jealous mother unwilling to let go. I needed another way. The opportunity came on a Sunday dinner. Vanessa offered to help clear the plates, and as she carried dishes to the sink, she paused to look at the framed photographs on the shelf. There was Richard in his work boots, Michael as a child holding a fishing pole, and one picture of me with a notary seal visible in the corner, a snapshot taken the day we signed the first property deed. "Such a proud day," she murmured, touching the frame. Then she turned and added with a sly smile, "You must have so many documents like this. It must be hard to keep track." Her words were gentle, but my heart thudded in my chest. That was the moment I knew she was circling closer, trying to sniff out the edges of the fortune I'd buried so deep. I smiled back at her, steady as stone. Some things are easier to keep track of than you think. The way her expression tightened told me she heard the warning, and I decided then that I would set my own trap, one she could never see coming. The very next morning, I called Harold Stein, the lawyer who had guided Richard and me through every contract, every trust, every tax strategy for nearly 3 decades. His voice was as calm and measured as it had always been. If she's circling Evelyn, then it's time to draw a line she won't see until it's too late, he said. Together, we built a decoy, not a lie. Not exactly. More like a mirror held up at the right angle. Harold created a digital portfolio showing assets of roughly $500,000, enough to look significant, but hardly close to the true $35 million. The portfolio was structured cleanly, with documents labeled and linked as if it were the real key to my financial life, but hidden in its code was a tracking feature. Anytime someone opened those files outside of my approved circle, I would receive an alert. No IP addresses, no technical jargon to confuse me, just a simple notification that the portfolio had been accessed. It was a tool designed for business clients protecting sensitive documents. In my hands, it became a quiet tripwire. I remember the chill of excitement as Harold walked me through the system. I wasn't a woman who enjoyed games, but I understood them when I had to. Richard used to say that investing was half patience, half defense. Now, defense meant creating an illusion strong enough to tempt anyone who came sniffing around. I saved the files to a thumb drive and locked it in the drawer of Richard's old desk. Then I waited. It didn't take long. Less than 2 weeks later, I received the first alert. The document had been opened at an odd hour, nearly midnight, and not on my devices. My pulse quickened, but I kept my face calm even when I saw Michael the next morning. He was cheerful, talking about plans to expand his work at the construction firm, his hands marked with the calluses of honest labor. My son wasn't the one poking around. A few days later, another alert arrived. This time, the access had come from a device in Florida. I didn't need anyone to tell me where Michael and Vanessa had gone for their honeymoon. The pieces began to click together with a clarity that was painful but undeniable. That evening, when Vanessa dropped by for tea, she tried again to charm me. She asked about my favorite recipes, complimented the curtain she had already commented on weeks before, even brought a jar of honey as a gift. But I saw the faint sheen of sweat near her temples, the way her fingers drummed on the table. She was nervous, and for the first time, I felt a strange surge of power in my silence. I didn't accuse. I didn't warn. I simply smiled, poured the tea, and let her chatter, because now I had proof. Not enough for a courtroom, perhaps, but enough to know what she wanted and how far she was willing to go. And I had no intention of letting her take another step without me watching. It was Harold again who brought me the final piece of the puzzle. One afternoon, he called and asked if I could come by his office. His tone carried a weight that made my stomach tighten, and by the time I sat across from his oak desk, I could already feel the ground shifting. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small flash drive. This came from the videographer, he explained. They recorded hours of raw footage at Michael's wedding. Most of it is just background, guests laughing, waiters moving plates, but sometimes the camera keeps rolling when people forget it's there. He slid the drive into his computer and pulled up a clip. The screen flickered to life, and there was Vanessa, in her wedding gown, glowing under strings of lights. She wasn't on the dance floor or at the head table. She was off to the side, near the bar, talking to one of her bridesmaids. Her voice was low, but clear enough. "Just give me a year," she said, her smile sharp as glass. "Michael will sign whatever I put in front of him. Once his mother's finances are merged with ours, Everything will be secure. The bridesmaid giggled nervously, glancing toward the camera, but Vanessa didn't notice. She adjusted her veil, lifted her champagne flute, and added, "The Carters have no idea how easy this is going to be." My chest constricted, even though part of me had suspected, even though I had already set my trap. Hearing her words spoken so plainly sent a shiver through me. It was one thing to feel a person's hunger. It was another to watch them confess it with a smile. Harold muted the clip and looked at me. "This isn't a courtroom confession, Evelyn, but it paints a picture. You need to decide what you want to do with it." I sat in silence for a long moment, watching Vanessa frozen on the screen, champagne glass poised like a trophy. I thought of Michael, dancing only a few feet away that night, his face unguarded, full of joy. He had no idea what promises were being whispered in the shadows. "I don't want revenge," I finally said. "I want clarity. For him. He needs to see who she really is." Harold nodded, his eyes softening. "Then you know what you have to do." On the drive home, the city blurred past my window. My heart was heavy, but beneath the heaviness was resolve. I wasn't going to storm into their house or throw accusations like weapons. No, that would only breed denial. Maybe even drive Michael further into her grasp. What I needed was a moment where the truth could speak for itself. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I knew exactly how it would happen. A single envelope, a single key, and the rest would be up to my son. A week later, I invited Michael over for supper. I cooked his favorite, roast chicken with rosemary from the garden and mashed potatoes the way Richard used to make them. He arrived just as the sun was dipping low, carrying that tired but content look of a man who had spent the day working with his hands. Vanessa didn't come. She had claimed a dinner with friends from her office. I didn't press. In truth, I was grateful. I needed Michael alone. We ate mostly in silence, comfortable the way family can be when words aren't necessary. After the plates were cleared and the coffee poured, I excused myself and returned with a plain white envelope. I placed it in front of him and set an old wooden key beside it. The key Richard had carved years ago, more a keepsake than a tool. Its grooves were worn smooth by the touch of our hands. Michael frowned, confused. "What's this? Mom?" I folded my hands, steadying my voice. "It's something you need to see. What you choose to do with it after, that's your decision." He opened the envelope. Inside were printed screenshots from the decoy file system, the alerts showing unauthorized access. Beneath them, a still frame from the wedding footage, Vanessa at the bar. Her lips curved around words I didn't need to repeat. I watched his face as he read, the flicker of disbelief, the tightening of his jaw, the shadow of pain clouding his eyes. "This can't be," he whispered, his voice breaking. "It is," I said softly. "I haven't spoken a word of it to her. I haven't confronted anyone. I wanted you to see for yourself. Without my voice in your ear. You're a man, Michael. You have to decide who you trust, who you build with." He pressed his palms against the table, his shoulders rigid. For a moment, I thought he might walk out, torn between loyalty and love. But then he reached for the key, holding it in his hand like it weighed more than iron. "This was Dad's," he said. "Yes," I answered. "He carved it when we bought the first house. He said every strong home needs a key to remind you of what it cost to build. That key opens nothing but memory. But it's yours now, and so is the choice." Tears rimmed his eyes, though he blinked them back. I can't believe I didn't see it. She's been She's been playing me. I reached across and covered his hand with mine. Don't blame yourself for trusting. Trust is a gift, Michael, but gifts must be given wisely. That's something your father always knew. The room fell silent except for the tick of the clock. Finally, Michael slid the envelope back toward me, but he kept the key. I'll handle this, he said, his voice low but firm, and for the first time in months, I felt Richard's promise stirring alive inside our son. It has been a year since that night at my kitchen table. The seasons have rolled over Virginia. The garden has bloomed and withered and bloomed again, and my son has changed in ways that make me proud every single day. Michael left the marriage quietly, without spectacle or shouting matches. Papers were filed, signatures exchanged, and Vanessa disappeared from our lives as swiftly as she had entered. I didn't push him for details. I didn't need to. Some endings speak loudly enough in silence. He still comes for supper on Sundays, but now his stories are different. He talks about the workshop he opened with two of his friends, how they're restoring old houses, breathing new life into bones that might otherwise crumble. His hands are rougher, his clothes often flecked with paint or sawdust, but his eyes are steady. He has built something of his own, just as his father wanted. And then one afternoon in early spring, a small package arrived at my door. Inside was a glass jar of homemade orange marmalade and a folded note in Vanessa's familiar handwriting. Evelyn, I'm sorry. I let fear and greed guide me. I thought securing wealth would save me from the mistakes of my family. I was wrong. Please forgive me, even if from a distance. I sat with that note in my lap for a long while. There was no bitterness left in me, only a quiet sadness and, strangely, a sense of closure. People are not always monsters. Sometimes they are simply weak, shaped by their own scars. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means refusing to let the wound stay open. That evening, I placed the jar on the kitchen shelf, beside Richard's old key that now rests in a small wooden box. Michael saw it later and asked what I planned to do with it. Keep it, I said. It's part of the story now. He nodded, understanding, without needing more words. When the house is quiet at night, I often sit on the porch where Richard once held my hand and asked me to protect our son from the weight of unearned fortune. I think about promises kept, about the silence I chose that spoke louder than confrontation ever could. I've learned that silence is not weakness. It is patience. It is strategy. And in the right hands, it can be a shield strong enough to protect a family, a legacy, even a young man's heart. If Richard were here, I know he'd smile at the man Michael has become, and perhaps he'd smile at me too, for knowing when to speak and when to let silence do the speaking for me. Because in the end, I never needed to raise my voice. I only needed to hold my ground. And thank God, I kept quiet. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.